morning. As Noel continues to bring us the series from the Sermon on the Mount, we're going to be looking at Matthew 6, verses 1 through 4, and in the NIV, it's entitled, Giving to the Needy. Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, that they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you.
Well, before we get started with our sermon this morning, we have a special opportunity. We're already preparing for a celebration of the season on December the 22nd, which is that last Sunday before Christmas. In the evening that night at 6 o'clock, we'll have a singing program. There is going to be a drama that is provided by the Epic class. Truth will be probably involved in that a little bit. And we have an opportunity for kids, grades 5 and under, to sing a song or two as part of that program. And the way that we do that is by giving them a chance to practice. And so if you are in grades 5 or under and you want to sing as part of that program, we would invite you, check with parents right now to make sure that that's okay. You can head out with Miss Megan at the back. And so just to be really clear, one, this is not kids' church, so it's not kids' church. This is practicing a song for our program. And then the other thing, too, is it's just for kids that want to do this. So if you don't want to do this, you can stay and listen to the sermon. Now, I know that's a tough one. Like, we're not exactly comparing apples and oranges here, right? Like, you might not love singing, but man, I'd want to do that more than listen to a sermon. The other warning is any kids grades 5 and under that just wander back into the hallways to go to the bathroom, you know who you are. You might get dragged into this class and you might be made to sing a solo. So just keep that in mind if you're making your bathroom break during the sermon, as you are in the habit of doing. Anyway, we're moving on. Alan Alda, famous for playing the wise-cracking yet compassionate Surgeon Hawkeye Pierce in the 1970s TV drama MASH, often had the uncomfortable experience of people in real life approaching him and asking for medical advice, mistakenly thinking that his on-screen performance of a surgeon was the result of some medical expertise that he might have. And so there was a time when, at the airport, a man approached Alan Alda as he's waiting for a flight. This is at the height of MASH's popularity, with a medical question about his daughter's medical condition. And Alda interrupted him politely as he began, explained he's not, in fact, a doctor, adding, "I just play one on TV." And so the man smiled and he nodded, seeming to understand what Alda was saying. But yet, in spite of the clarification, he continued as soon as Alda stopped, describing the medical issue, seemingly convinced that Alda must have some kind of helpful insight. Similarly, the actor Noah Wiley, who played the dreamy Dr. Carter on ER, also experienced fans mistaking him for a doctor. He met a fan once who asked him for his opinion to interpret some medical symptoms that he was experiencing, and Wiley, amused but flattered, had to explain that his medical expertise did not extend past what was written in the script. Now, you might excuse some people's thinking because of the way these shows are done. TV shows like Grey's Anatomy and ER and even House deliberately research actual medical problems and medical terminology. They have their actors actually perform what would appear to be real medical procedures to make the show as medically authentic as possible. They look like real doctors and real nurses, and they sound like real doctors and nurses, though Julie says they don't act like real doctors and nurses. It's not all that real, and it's not that authentic. In the first century, they would be called hypocrites, which is where we get the English word for hypocrite. But in Greek, the word means it's a stage player or an actor who's portraying something. And in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus has something to tell us this morning. And he uses this word, hypocrite. But we'll come back to that later. By way of review, if you recall, the Sermon on the Mount begins with the Beatitudes, the 9 blessings. Jesus says, surprise, the kingdom of God doesn't belong to the rich or the wealthy or powerful. It starts with all of you. So you're the blessed ones. You're the salt of the earth. You're the light. You're the city on the hill. And next comes the main body of the sermon, and it comes in 3 parts. Now, we've already talked about part 1, chapter 5, about living in right relationship with God and with others. The Torah and the prophets have shown us what it means to live rightly with God and rightly with others. And Jesus is the one who came to fulfill that. Jesus tells us that doing right by God and doing right by others means exceeding the righteousness of the Pharisees and the scribes. And so this week, we're going to begin section 2 of the Sermon on the Mount. It is a section that's focused on religious practices. A religious practice, then, is a discipline that we practice. It's a habit that we inhabit, if you will. An action that guides us and shapes us, informs us. It helps us live in right relationship with God and with neighbor. And so today, in today's culture, our imagination is a little bit limited, I would say. We tend to be very reductive on the matter of this question. What does a follower of Jesus do? And so if I were to ask you, what does a follower of Jesus do? What would you say? So someone shout it out. What does a follower of Jesus do, or what are they known for? Loving other people. That's a great answer. I'm afraid it wouldn't be the top answer for most people, but I think that you're right. What simple thing? Okay? You guys have a much higher opinion of Christians than I tend to. Daily prayer, that's another great one. I'm going for going to church. And if you want to be sassy about it, I will lay it on thick this morning. I think that's all most people think being a follower of Jesus is. Now, funnily enough, Statistics Canada thinks that a practicing Christian is somebody who attends worship at least once a month. Like, that's a pretty low bar. You might accidentally go to church once a month. But if there are other things that followers of Jesus are known for, they are mostly in the realms of opinions besides these 3 things, which we'll get to in a minute. It might be how you vote, or it might be your opinion on abortion, or it might be your opinion on the interpretation or inspiration of the Bible, or it might be through just occasional actions that you do, like charitable donations, rather than something that a person habitually does. Now, in Jesus' day, followers of Jesus had a different set of core practices. Now, you might find it surprising, but while Jesus was alive, and during the first few years, the early part of the church's history, church attendance was not considered a core value. Church attendance was not a common practice amongst followers of Jesus. You see, many of them, particularly Greek believers, lived in a town where there wasn't a synagogue. They didn't go to church the way we might go to church, the way we might imagine it. There were other practices that were central to being part of the faith community. And so in chapter 6, Jesus sets up these 3 practices here as the core practices. Jesus says, in his day and age, the core practices, the things that you just find Christians doing all the time, are giving to the poor and daily prayer and fasting. Those are the 3 core practices Jesus thinks are the common wheelhouse of a follower of Jesus. And those are the 3 things that he's going to talk about here in chapter 6. This week, we're just going to talk about that first one, giving to the poor. Now, Jesus warns us, be careful, in chapter 6, verse 1, be careful that you don't practice your righteousness in front of others just to be seen by them. See verse 1. Now this sentence needs to be read very carefully. So there is, in the ESV, it renders it, be careful not to practice your righteousness. The KJV says, do ye not alms before men. So alms before men, that's an interesting one. NIRV reads, do good works. And the RSV, interestingly, says, beware of practicing your piety. Now, pious practices sound like, they're higher and holier than thou, but it just means virtues. Virtuous practices. Beware of doing good things just to be seen by others. Now, there is, of course, nothing wrong with doing good deeds, for crying out loud. In fact, Jesus is making an important point here. Jesus is telling us that righteous deeds are an act of devotion. Generosity to the poor and praying and fasting, the big three, are not ways of earning favor with God. You don't impress God with the things that you do. God isn't impressed by our acts of reverence, but rather our acts of devotion together stir our hearts. They're like spiritual exercise. They grow our heart to love Jesus more, to love God more, and to love the people that God loves. Righteous acts like this are shaping and molding our spiritual selves. It's good for our heart and it's good for our soul to give to the poor, to fast, and to pray. Now, secondly, there's nothing specifically wrong with doing good deeds in front of people. In fact, sometimes good deeds have to be done in front of people. If, for example, someone is sick and you wanted to go and visit them, you would likely get caught doing that. It's not something you could keep secret. You would come into the house, and if no one else knew, at least the sick person would know that you'd come to visit them. Or if you came to bring them a casserole, maybe their immediate family would find out about this deed. That's not the point. Even here this morning, we have prayed together here in our worship service with other people present. Jesus makes it clear that the problem about doing good deeds in front of people, practicing our piety, isn't that we're doing it in front of people, it's that we're doing it for the purpose of, or in order to, be noticed by others. On the face of the text, it might seem like Jesus is contradicting himself, because back in chapter 5, verse 16, Jesus says, let your lights shine so before men that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So how does Jesus want us to do this? To not do them or do them in secret, whereas he was then earlier saying that we should be shining our light. Well, Augustine steps in to try and explain that one, and he writes, one must look into the human heart to see what direction it is turned and to what point its gaze is fixed. If someone wishes their good works to be seen by others, and if they then reckon their glory and profit according to human estimation and seeks it in the sight of others, they will fulfill neither the one command, let your light shine, nor the other, to give in secret. So in other words, Augustine is saying it's all about the heart. It's all about the motivation. It's all about the why, not the what. The problem here isn't the act itself, but what's behind the act. What's the motivation? And so maybe I'm visiting someone who is sick, and I subconsciously make sure to visit them at a time when other people are going to see me do it. That's what Jesus is talking about. Now, again, in our text this morning, we're dealing with this honor-shame culture that Jesus is a part of. And it's a difficult thing for us to really get our heads wrapped around. It's a cultural value in Jesus' day, and it still seems remote to us. In an honor-shame culture, everybody's working the ladder of public honor and notoriety in the eyes of other people. It's a core value, not just for vain people, but for everybody. Everybody seeks honor. Everybody tries to avoid shame, and we'll come back to that maybe in a minute. Jesus is warning us that if that's what you're going for, if you're just going for honor for yourself, you'll get your reward. People will think you're a devout religious person. And your Father who is in heaven will know what you're doing. Your heart will not be changed. You will not see the spiritual transformation that ought to come from practices of service and spiritual benefit. You'll do the right thing, but you're doing it for the wrong reason. So let's drill down this morning and talk a little bit more about giving to the poor, or giving to those in need. The first of these three practices. Jesus says, don't announce it with trumpets. Now, is he serious? Were people seriously doing that? They were coming to the collection box at the temple, and they were pulling out the coins, and then they were, ta-da, smash, dropping it in there. Now, it could be what Jesus is referring to here are the trumpets at the temple in Jerusalem that would announce daily the times of prayer, or the times of the sacrifices. Maybe Jesus is just exaggerating here, but in Jerusalem, the priests would blow their horns in the afternoon, and that would announce the time of afternoon prayers. Or in the morning, they would blow the horns to announce the daily offerings. And then when the crowds heard the horns, they would then come to the temple. In fact, we see an example of this in Acts chapter 3. Peter and John are on their way to the temple for afternoon prayers. They're on their way because they heard the horn. They heard the horn, and they're on their way and met a crippled man outside the beautiful gate. When the trumpets sounded, a crowd would gather. I think Jesus is just being a little bit cheeky here. That's what I think is going on. Jesus has used exaggeration to make a point in the past, and here he brings up an absurd point. He says, don't sound the trumpets. Don't draw the crowd in order to earn favor for yourself, but instead don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. What a great image. Even to this day, it still just packs a punch, translated even into a different language. Hands, of course, don't know what the other hand is doing, and yet Jesus uses this silly word picture to powerfully make his point. Give in secret. Give so that no human honor could possibly come to you, and your good deed will only serve to earn you honor with God. In other words, giving quietly, giving secretly, demonstrates with your action that you care more about what God thinks than what people think. I would rather receive honor from God than to receive honor from any other person. Now, it's worth mentioning here at Tintern that only one or maybe two people know how much you give. I don't know how much anybody gives, except me. And the elders don't know either. We have a practice where we keep that private, that your donations are brought in and handled by one person only, and there's only one other person that has access to the information of money coming inside. Your giving is private. It is something between you and God. Jesus' point here isn't that giving has to be secret, or as some have argued, that if you get a charitable receipt, it's no longer a good deed. That's not what Jesus is saying at all. Jesus' point here is that giving for the purpose of earning honor in an honor-shame culture serves no spiritual benefit. What little reward you would get for that action, you have already received. Okay, let's talk about that hypocrite word. There it is. We read this word hypocrite. Here Jesus calls these showy givers hypocrites. And so what does Jesus mean by that? Now, what Jesus means by hypocrite is not what we think of when we think of that word, the word in English. There is a slight difference in the two. When we think of hypocrite, we might think of a person, for example, giving a lecture on the need to observe the posted speed limits. So imagine you had somebody that was rattling off a speech about how we really need to make sure that we're not speeding in town. And then you rode in their car next week and they blew through a school zone going 70 kilometers an hour. What a hypocrite. You've got somebody that would say one thing, but then their actions don't line up with their words. That's the way we tend to think of the word hypocrite. Or maybe you hear a mega church pastor preaching to his church that they should live within their means so that they would have more to give to the ministry of the church. And then you find out that this pastor has used church funds to purchase a jet so that he can get to and from his cottage more quickly. Or maybe he can use the jet to fly around the country on his world book tour. What a hypocrite. His words don't match his actions. In English, we tend to think of a hypocrite. Lives by the do as I do and not as I, or do as I say, not as I do philosophy. Their words don't match their actions. But that's not precisely what Jesus has in mind in here. Jesus is using this Greek word, hypokrites. It's a compound word starting with a preposition, hupo, that means from under, or under, and krites, which means to judge or to interpret. And so the word vividly imagines a Greek performer behind a mask, pretending or interpreting a character out on a stage play. They would act out or imagine a performed identity. Now, it's not necessarily a moral judgment here, that like a hypocrite. They weren't saying that actors per se were somehow bad, though Greek culture was considered vulgar and worldly by the early church. We think of a hypocrite as a person whose words and actions aren't consistent, but that's not exactly what Jesus is thinking of here. Jesus has a bigger picture, and one that's perhaps a bit more disturbing if we're honest. What Jesus is saying is a hypocrite has words or deeds that don't line up with inner motivations. Jesus is not saying this morning, make sure your words match your deeds. Jesus is telling you, check your heart. Check your motivation. Consider why you do the things that you do. Jesus' words of warning bring us to an uncomfortable realization. It's not just about doing the right thing. You can even do the right thing and do it for the wrong reason. Your motivation can be wrong. It's not about faithful church attendance. If your motivation is on making a show of being a regular church attender, Jesus says you'll get your reward. It's not about not swearing or not using foul language or not smoking or drinking and letting other people know that. Jesus says if you're just trying to make a show of it, you'll get your reward. Jesus is aiming for not just integrity between words and actions. Jesus is aiming for his followers to have actions and words that are in step with their God-centered identity. What Jesus is warning against here this morning is a performative mindset where we are focused on performance standards and outcomes that can be managed. The core spiritual practices of Jesus' followers, giving to the poor, prayer, and fasting, are done not because they get the most cred, but those things are done because they bring about transformation in a disciple's hearts. It changes your heart to do those things on a regular basis, not just for the physical benefit that the poor might experience. Now, while we don't worry so much about honor and shame in our culture today, we do practice our own form of vanity, if you will, virtue signaling, where we're cultivating and curating a preferred vision of ourselves or our lives, whether it is on social media or whether it is just simply with the opinions of your friends. We all like to make it look like we've got it all together. The best way, however, to cut off these vanity projects is for us to get on our knees and pray. The best way to stop our vanity projects is to give of our means to help others and to give secretly so that nobody even knows. The best way to break through these vanity projects is to give up some things for a season, for a time, in order to focus on other issues, other spiritual matters. There's something about healthy confession and vulnerability that's tremendously powerful in these vanity projects. Having someone in your life that you are truly and just completely honest with. On Wednesday nights, we talk about the sermon and extend that conversation both on Zoom and here at the building. And we talk about these things. And I've noticed over the past few weeks that there are some Wednesdays when we're in a groove. And somebody in the group is willing to be truly vulnerable about a moment in their life or about the topic at hand. And they kind of go a place where they're willing to really just be honest with the group. And something powerful and transformative takes place in the group when that happens. Maybe somebody takes some time to talk about how this issue has come home for them. Or maybe somebody's honest about a challenge, something that they personally struggle with. The truth of the matter is that religious practices, for their own sake, they just don't transform the heart. They don't change us. They don't heal us. They just leave us stuck. Giving of our money, and even more precious still, giving of our time, changes us from the inside out. The places where our giving is difficult is very instructive, because wherever you find it difficult to give from, that's probably the place where the idols are living in your life. If you find parting with money difficult, even just small amounts of money, there's probably a scarcity mindset at work in your heart. If you find giving up time difficult, you probably have idols related to performance and production. We've mentioned over the last few months this partnership that we would like to continue and to begin with Safe Families. We've mentioned it a number of times. It's a ministry that fills a gap between children's and family services, police services, and other service networks in the church. It allows us to step into the lives of people that need help. And we've talked about a number of the different roles that you can play. You could serve as a host family and provide respite care for kids in a family that are in the midst of a crisis. You could have some kids come and stay in a spare bedroom at your house for a day or 2 days, or maybe 3 days tops. Tim Vanderhoffen mentioned that that's one of the ways that he has helped to serve in this ministry that he is also a part of. If that somehow doesn't feel like it's something that you're called to do, there's also being a family friend. A family friend is somebody who has scheduled appointments to meet with perhaps a single mom, or a couple, or a parent, or a father that are in the midst of a crisis. You can come and be a friend to them, provide support for them, be a listening ear. Maybe you can help with something that's going on in their household and provide them with some parenting guidance. Maybe you've got kids that are now at the age, like adult age, and you can now invest in somebody that's struggling through those preteen years and might not see any hope coming. You could come alongside them and be a friend, provide support. Or other way to serve is you could become a driver. Many of these folks don't have cars and have to get to doctor's appointments early in the morning or perhaps late in the day, and they need to somehow get there before they could ride buses or before they could ride transit. You could provide a ride, just getting somebody to and or from an appointment. Or maybe you could be a resource friend. There's a WhatsApp group that you could join with Safe Families, and on that list they'll mention some needs, that a family needs a crib, or a family needs somebody to provide some respite care in this time frame between 3 and 6, when kids get home from school, before parents get home from work. Or maybe you could make meals. There's a meal service, a list that names, we need a meal for 4, provided, dropped off at this address or this location. There are a number of different ways you can serve with Safe Families. And over the next few weeks, we're hoping to tell you a bit more about that and invite you to somehow become part of that ministry to kids and to families, both in St. Catharines and Welland and Niagara Falls and in other areas in the Niagara region. We ask that you would mindfully pray about those things. Jesus invites us into some formative practices that transform and shape our hearts. And Jesus' word to us this morning is to not do it for human benefit, not do it to be seen by others, but to do it quietly, generously, and graciously. Do it only for the honor of God.